Hey there everyone, and welcome to my channel. I am Lauren of Lauren Makes Plans, and today I'm here to journal Genesis chapter 1 in my journaling Bible. It's been a while since I've done a full-blown Bible journaling video, but I'm excited to jump into this one and into the book of Genesis. So let's get started with that. I've got all the things here. I have, obviously, my Bible, which I get a lot of questions about. This is the ESV large print single column journaling Bible from Crossway, and this is in the natural leather flap with strap edition, which I feel like they could have come up with a better name for that because that's a lot of words, and flap with strap is not the most fun way to do it. But that's what this is that I use. And obviously I've customized it some myself. Crossway does not include these fantastic little fringes on the side. I did that. And then last time you saw where I added in this context sheet, or where I made this context sheet for the book of Genesis, and if you go find me on TikTok or Instagram, you can see where I actually inserted this into my Bible on a reel over there. So I've got all of that started. I also have all of my highlighters and pens and things here. So all of these are the EC dual tip highlighters that came out with last year's launch, and these are all from different packs, and I can't tell you what pack they all came out of, but there were 3 different packs that came out, and I think I have at least one color from every pack in here, or at least 2 of the 3 packs in here. So that's what I've got, and the colors are coral, I think this is marigold, peach, moss, what is this one? Teal, Bermuda, and heather are the colors I'm using for Genesis, because you have to do a rainbow color scheme with Genesis. You just do. I also have the pens that I like to use to write in my Bible. I have my Tombow brush pen here that I love, that I use for everything. And then to actually write on my Bible pages, I prefer a micron. So I have a micron 03 here, which is what I use to write most of my notes. And then this one is a Mr. Pen black multiliner, but it's essentially the same as a micron, but it's a 01, and I use it sometimes in the margins whenever I'm doing some of my hand lettering and the letters get really small. This one is a little bit better because it's finer to do some of the finer details around some of the hand lettering. So that's why I have both of those. And then I have my notes that we'll be working off of here. I like to take my notes in a notebook first during Bible study or teaching time or general Sunday morning service. And then I transfer the notes that I want to keep in my Bible over later. So that's what I'm working with here. And this looks like a lot of notes, and it is, but I'm not putting all of these in my Bible. The way the study that I am using to go through this book works is the first week was completely focused just on Genesis 1:1, and I cannot fit 2 pages worth of notes here just for one verse. So I'm just going to pick out a few details that I want to keep off of this, and then we'll move on into this, which covers all the way into chapter 2. So that's what we're working with here. So we're going to just get started with that. So I need to kind of get organized here where I have all of my things accessible. All right, so I'm going to start by looking over these notes from Genesis 1:1 and seeing what I kind of want to write in here. Usually I put my context information just up in this little space here, but as you can see, this is a lot more information than what will fit up here, and I didn't like having to cram it in or it take up a lot of my space for actually writing next to the scripture. So that's why I've started doing these cover sheets, which means I have this space up here that I can work with a little more, which is good because I have a whole lot just about this first verse. So I do like this right here that says the focus in the opening is not the creation, but the creator. And in the very opening statements, it introduces us to the idea that the Bible is not a book about us, which we tend to think that it is. We tend to think that the Bible is a book that was given to us with the intentions of telling us about who we are and how we should live, and that we primarily put the focus on ourselves when reading the Bible, which it will tell us who we are and how we should live, but that is not what the Bible's primary focus is. And that idea is introduced to us in Genesis 1:1, that this is not a book about us, this is a book about God. And by learning about who he is through this book, we then learn who we should be in relation to who he is, not the other way around, which is how we tend to read it. So I really like that idea. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in here, and I'm probably going to kind of start up here in this top section, and I'm going to start with this coral, which is called coral, but it writes red. It's just red. So I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to highlight verse 1 in red, and then any of my notes up here that I make about it will also be in this red color, so that way I know that they correspond together. All right, so there we have that about the first verse, and I am going to just kind of mark here around God, who is the one that it is talking about. That's the focus. This is a book about who he is, not about us. So just kind of looking through the rest of my notes here about Genesis 1:1, and there's a lot of stuff here, and it's a lot of really good stuff. But I don't really have space for a lot of it, and I really don't have room for much more than what I wrote, and I think that kind of sums up what I really wanted to take from this verse. So I think that's probably mostly what we're going to take from this here, and I'm going to move into what I have here. And also, a side note before I move on into any of this, if any of you saw my video from a week or so ago, the last Plan With Me I did, where I talked about how insane my life has been, and that I was having to take my youngest Elliot to the urgent care because he wasn't walking right on his foot. Just in case you all were wondering about that, because I've had some comments about him. Just wanted to give you an update on him, that he is doing okay. He's walking better on his foot. I did take him to urgent care and they x-rayed it, and he does have a fracture in his foot. I'm not really sure how that happened. I think he tripped over something like a metal laundry basket, I think. I'm not really sure how it happened, but he does have a fracture in his foot. I did take him back. It's been a week and a half since it happened now that I'm filming this. And I did take him back to the orthopedic today. They re-x-rayed it. It's still fractured, but it's not bad. It looks okay. And he is starting to walk more normal and complain about it a little less. So they think it will heal fairly quickly. So he is doing okay. So thank you all for checking on that. And now back to Genesis. So I've got some stuff about verse 2. So like I said with this, about this is a book about God, and that the focus is on him as the creator and not the creation throughout this first chapter. It's actually 35 times that God is the subject of the sentence, or the subject that is being spoken of, just in this first chapter. So that reinforces the idea that this is a book about him, and that this focus in the opening of the Bible is not, this is the creation account in chapter 1. And the focus is not on what is being created. The focus is on who is doing the creating. So I have some stuff about verse 2, where it says, the earth was without form and void. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So I've got some things about that. So we're going to go with the peach now, which I almost had in the wrong order, and that would have made me sad. So I'm going to mark verse 2. I don't know if it bothers anybody else, but whenever there's like a highlighter gap in between the two lines, that bugs me. So I tend to go back and fill that in like a lot. So first, I'm going to underline without, the earth was without form and void. So without form and void, it was essentially formless and empty. So God is going to form and fill the earth. About the hovering spirit. So the spirit. So the Spirit was expectantly hovering and waiting to give life, because all throughout the scriptures, there's a bunch of scripture references that are in the workbook for this week that talks about how the Spirit's job is to give life. There's a bunch of scripture references about the Spirit giving life in a variety of circumstances. So we see the Spirit of God hovering over the waters right before creation, awaiting the moment to give life, because that's what the Spirit does, is give life. All right, so let's look over some more things here. so then we move into the actual creation account, and there's a lot of things on all the different days. And I don't completely know how I want to do it because there's a pattern all throughout. Like each day of creation follows a specific pattern. And she had us mark it in a specific way in the study. And I'm trying to decide if I want to mark it in a similar way through this, which I might actually do. All right, so I went and grabbed my iPad, which is glaring pretty bad. But I found this app called Pencil Bible, and it lets you highlight and mark up the Bible in all the different ways here, which I love because Jen Wilkin studies in particular have you mark up the scripture in different ways like this all the time. And I love being able to do it on here. So this is how she had us mark up this creation account in chapter 1. So I think I want to kind of follow along with some of that a little bit and use my variety of colors that I have here in the rainbow scheme to mark the patterns in the creation account, and then write some of my notes that I have in the side margin. And this is a little different than how I usually do my Bible journaling. Usually it's much more, I mean, you guys have watched some of my Bible journaling videos before, so usually it's a lot more structured. So very specifically, if I highlight it, it matches up with notes over here, which is what I've done so far here. But my notes throughout here tend to not match up with specific verses as much as their details of how this creation account is organized. And it's important to see the organization and the order in the way that creation was done to kind of get the full picture of what I have written here. So I think I'm going to go ahead and kind of do some of this marking the way I have it on here in here, if that makes sense. So I also brought my workbook. This is the study workbook that I'm using to actually do this, which is God of Creation by Jen Wilkin, and it covers Genesis 1 through 11. So that is what I'm going to kind of reference back to mark all the things. So the first thing I'm going to mark is everywhere it says on a specific day of creation, everywhere it says, and God said, let there be. All right, so everywhere God says, let there be, I'm going to mark that. So this is day 1. God said, let there be light. So everywhere that and God said, let there be is going to be in this yellow color for each of the days. So day 2, God said, let there be an expanse in the waters. So that's all the let there be moments. And I'm gonna go back and underline where it says let there be in all the places, or let thee, or all right. So then the next, these pages at the beginning and end of the Bible are complicated to write on because of how everything shifts with the cover. And I just came from Revelation, where I'm literally like writing on the last pages way back here. Now I'm writing on the very first pages. So that's fun. So the next phrase that we're looking at is, and it was so, or and there was, and it was so moment. So verse 3 says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So God said, let it be, and it was so. So we're gonna mark all of those all the way through the days. All right, next up, we're looking at all the places that God said it was good. So we're starting with that one on day 1 in verse 4. And God saw that the light was good. All right, so the next pattern we're looking at is where God calls something something. So in day 1, God called the light day and the darkness night. And God called the expanse heaven. God called the dry land earth. And the waters that were together he called seas. Which is interesting because he only calls something. He only, there's only 3 days that he called something. There were 3 days of that, and then he didn't call anything else in the other days. All right, and the last thing is there was evening and morning, and it was the whatever day. So evening and morning and the first day. There was evening and morning and the second day. All right, so that's different than how I normally do things, but the way that this chapter is laid out is different than the way a lot of things are laid out throughout. So now that I have all of those things marked out, I have some notes about them that I'm going to mark in the side, and I'm also going to mark the days of creation. So this was the first day. Okay, there's all the days marked out. So I'm going to look at, first I'm going to look at where everything is marked out, where God said, and it was so. So essentially what we're seeing here is that God speaks and the cosmos responds. And I'm going to try my best to keep my notes coordinated to the ways that they're marked over here, because it stresses me out if they're not. So the way that we kind of see this, I'm going to mark it in the God speaks in yellow and the cosmos responds in green, because everywhere that I have marked yellow is where God said, let there be, and in green, and it was so. So we see that God speaks in yellow, and in green, we see that the cosmos is responding. So then we see that it was good. Which essentially means it was perfect. It was complete. He's created it exactly the way he intended to. We see throughout here as well that he is a God of separation. He separated the light from the darkness. He separated the waters. He separates everything, each according to its own kind. So we also see that in here. Had to kind of pause for a second writing that because I had brain fart for a second and forgot how to spell the word separates. With God naming things or calling things up here in these, naming something is essentially exercising dominion over it, which means that you are taking responsibility for it. It's why your parents probably never let you name a stray dog, because if you name it, then you're essentially saying, I am exercising dominion over you, you stray cat, and I'm going to name you and take responsibility for you. Nobody wants to take responsibility for a stray cat, right? I don't. We don't. My family is allergic to cats, so we can't do that anyways. But that's what's going on here. So him calling something, when he called it, he is exercising his dominion and his right to have that dominion over it as the creator of it. He is exercising his dominion over what he has created and taking responsibility for what he has created, which will come into play later in chapter 2 whenever he gives Adam and Eve dominion over the animals and the things of the earth and tells Adam, name all of these things. And he tells Adam, you are to essentially be responsible for these creatures because I've given you dominion over them. You have named them, and now you're responsible for them. So that's kind of what we see going on here. So before Adam was ever responsible and had dominion over the things in the garden, God is responsible for and has dominion over the things that he has created because he's the creator, and that is his right to be responsible for and have dominion over what he has created. It's the same with our children. I am responsible for and have dominion over my children who I created, who I named, and it is my responsibility and my husband's responsibility to care for them. And that's what we're seeing go on here, that he is naming things and taking his responsibility and his dominion over those things. So the last thing we see is it says there was evening and morning, and it was the whatever day. And we see that for all 6 days of creation, which is really interesting. If you ever wondered, why does he say evening and morning and not morning and evening? Because the morning comes first. But we have to remember that Moses is writing this book to a Jewish audience, to the Israelites. And in Jewish culture, the Sabbath was from sundown to sun up. It worked the opposite way. So Sabbath begins sundown Friday evening and ends sundown Friday night. So you can see who he is speaking to in the context with the Jewish audience with this evening to morning language. So we do see here, I'm going to kind of make a note of this down here at the bottom, that after looking at all of this pattern throughout, this is a very ordered creation. God is not a God of chaos. He is a God of order in every sense. And you can see it all the way in the beginning, in just the structure and the order that everything was set up. He is constantly bringing order from chaos from the very beginning. So this is a very ordered creation. Oh, check that out so far. All marked up and patterned out. Love it. So that's the first 5 days, and then we finally moved to day 6. And in day 6, the pattern shifts. It shifts from a let there be statement to let us in verse 29. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So I'm gonna mark that. So we already kind of talked about this dominion idea a little bit, in the sense that God has taken responsibility for the things and exercising his dominion over the creation by naming it. But now it's talking about let them, the man that was created, have dominion. So this is essentially giving him stewardship over the other creatures and beings. Which goes into that responsibility idea that we were talking about, because when we talk about being good stewards of what we have been given, which is also talked about in the New Testament, we're talking about being good stewards of our time, good stewards of our money, good stewards of this or that, or whatever it is that we're trying to steward well. What are we essentially saying? We need to be responsible with our time. We need to be responsible with our money. We need to be responsible with how we live our lives. So that is what is happening here. God is saying, let us give man stewardship or responsibility, dominion over what has been given to him, over what has been created. All right, we're finally off this first page. Now we're moving on. And then actually for the next week of the study that I have here for week 4, there's a lot more on this day 6 of creation, which is actually talked about more in chapter 2 as well. So I'm sure there'll be more things to fill in for that. And then we also see that we have 3 days of forming and 3 days of filling. So these first 3 days are days that it is being formed. The sky, the light and the darkness, and the sky from the earth, and the waters from the dry land, all were formed. And then days 4, 5, and 6, it was all filled. So it was the sun, the moon, and the stars were created. The fish, the birds, the plants, the land animals, man, all created on days 4, 5, and 6. So you see in the first 3 days that it was all formed, and in the last 3 days it was all filled. Which I might add in here somewhere, but I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to put it at this current moment. It might have to be a sticky note, but I don't know that I'm going to do that right this minute. So then we move on to day 7. So we see in verse 1 and 2, it's actually verses 1 through 3 that it talks about day 7. And it does not clearly follow the pattern that the other 6 days follow, because it is very different. And what we see here is the first Sabbath day. But my favorite thing that we see here, chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished. And all the host of them, and on the 7th day, God finished his work. So what we see here is the very first "it is finished" moment. And we know how that is going to play out for us in the future. God finishes the work here, and then the fall happens, and we wait for it. They wait for it all throughout the Old Testament. And then the New Testament, Christ shows up and is crucified on the cross, and it is finished fully with what he did on the cross. And we are still living in this already finished but not yet finished moment that we are in today, because Christ has finished the work, but we are not fully and finally with him. And in Revelation, we see in Revelation chapter 21 that the new Jerusalem comes down as the bride of Christ, and it is fully and finally finished. So I just love this moment. I just think it's so beautiful that in Genesis chapter 2, we see the first "it is finished" moment on the first Sabbath day. And being this, when Moses wrote this, he didn't know what was to come, because it was not finished for him on the cross yet. So he didn't know how big it was when he wrote this first "it is finished" moment on this first Sabbath day. But where we are in time, I just think it's so beautiful that we can see it was finished the first time. It was finished with Christ. It will be finished when the end comes, and I love it so much. So that's what we're at here, is the very first "it is finished" moment on day 7 of creation. And we'll end it all out with this definition of Sabbath, which I really liked. Sabbath rest is the way that we worship God, and Sabbath is the ceasing of labor for the purpose of devoting ourselves to the joyful task of worship, which is our true calling. So people tend to think of Sabbath, or I'm going to take Sabbath today, I'm going to rest today. People think of it as just, resting from work and just chilling out and binge watching a TV show and doing what we want because God told us to rest. That is not Sabbath rest. Sabbath rest is ceasing from labor for the purpose of worship, which is what we are called to in the first place. So that is Genesis chapter 1 through creation and into the beginning of chapter 2 through day 7 of creation. I have more notes that I will add in later on chapter 2 and the creation of Adam and Eve and going back into day 6 a little bit. But I really like how this turned out so far, and I'm really liking this Genesis study. Obviously, it's Jen Wilkins, so you can't go wrong. So I'm really excited about how this turned out. I really liked it. So let me know what you thought in the comments, if you have any thoughts on any of this. And I think that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you know when I post new videos on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching.